If we were to draw a map of human suffering, we would instinctively look west, toward the churning gray waters of the Atlantic, where the ghost ships of the Middle Passage still haunt the collective memory of the world. But to look only there is to see but a fragment of a vast, broken mosaic that covers the entirety of human history and spans every continent where civilization has dared to plant its flag. We are taught that slavery was a specific chapter, written in black and white between the coasts of Africa and the Americas. Yet the truth is far older, far darker, and far more universal, stretching back to the very moment one human being realized they could hold the power of life and death over another and claim their breath as property. Imagine standing on the burning sands of the Sahara, centuries before Columbus ever set sail, watching a caravan snake its way north, not laden with gold or spices, but with human souls, a trade route of bone and blood that pulsed for over 1,000 years, pumping millions of captives from the heart of Africa into the courts of the Mediterranean and the Middle East. This is the story of the silent millions whose chains did not rattle in the cotton fields of the New World, but in the salt mines of Mesopotamia, the harems of Constantinople, the galleys of the Barbary coast, and the rice paddies of ancient Korea. A story that demands we widen our aperture to understand that slavery was not a peculiar institution of one region, but the terrible engine that powered the ancient world. To understand this, we must strip away our modern sensibilities and step into the sandals of a Roman citizen walking the Via Sacra, where the concept of freedom was the exception, not the rule, and where 30% of the population existed as talking tools, sentient furniture to be used and discarded at the whim of a master. Here, in the marble heart of the empire, slavery was blind to race. It cared only for conquest, consuming the blonde-haired Gauls, the dark-eyed Syrians, and the fierce Thracians with equal indifference, stripping them of their names and reducing them to items in a ledger. We see the gladiator, celebrated in our movies as a hero, but in reality, a slave condemned to die for the amusement of a crowd that viewed his blood as a cheaper commodity than wine. But if we cast our gaze eastward, we encounter a tragedy often shrouded in silence: the massive Arab slave trade that operated across the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea for over a millennium, a system that predated the Atlantic trade by 700 years and outlived it into the 20th century. While the Atlantic trade focused on male labor for agriculture, this Eastern trade had a different, more insidious appetite, demanding women for domestic servitude and sexual exploitation, and young men who were often subjected to the brutal procedure of castration to serve as eunuchs, guardians of the sanctity of the elite households. The survival rate for this mutilation was horrifyingly low, meaning that for every eunuch who stood silent and robed in a caliph's palace, 10 boys had bled to death in the sands, unmourned and unremembered. This trade created a diaspora that dissolved into the local populations, leaving fewer distinct communities than in the Americas, a phantom presence that is harder to trace but no less real. We must travel further, to the jagged coastlines of northern Europe, where the word slave itself was forged, not from the Latin, but from the word Slav, capturing the tragic history of the Slavic peoples who were hunted, captured, and sold by the thousands by Viking raiders, and later by Crimean Tatars. Picture the terror of a villager on the Dnieper River seeing the silhouette of a longship cutting through the mist, knowing that the men on board sought no land or crown, but flesh to sell on the markets of Volga and Byzantium. These Viking traders, often romanticized as explorers, were ruthless traffickers who bound the economies of the North to the wealth of the East with ropes of human bondage. It is a stark reminder that for centuries, the white skin of a European was no shield against the iron collar. In fact, it was a high-value commodity in the markets of Cairo and Cordoba. This reality hit its terrifying peak with the Barbary corsairs of North Africa, pirates who turned the Mediterranean into a hunting ground, raiding the coasts of Italy, Spain, and even as far north as Iceland and Ireland, dragging over 1 million Europeans into chains between the 16th and 19th centuries. Imagine the village of Baltimore in Ireland fast asleep on a cool June night in 1631, only to be awakened by the screams of neighbors and the smell of smoke as corsairs stormed their homes, dragging over 100 men, women, and children from their beds, forcing them onto ships from which they would never return, destined to live out their days hauling stone for the Sultan's walls or rowing until their hearts burst in the galleys of Algiers. This was a world where no one was safe, where the horizon itself was a threat. Yet, the story grows even more complex when we look at the Ottoman Empire and the peculiar institution of the Deşirme, or the blood tax, where Christian boys were systematically taken from their families in the Balkans, converted to Islam, and trained to become the Janissaries, the elite soldiers and administrators of the empire. This creates a historical paradox that is difficult for the modern mind to grasp. Slaves who held immense power, commanded armies, and governed provinces, yet were legally the property of the Sultan, unable to pass their status to their children, living in a gilded cage where the door was unlocked only by death. It challenges our definition of slavery as purely a state of abject poverty, revealing it instead as a totalizing system of ownership that could encompass even the most powerful men in the state. If we turn our eyes to the vast expanse of Asia, we find that the Great Wall of China was not just built with stone and mortar, but with the lives of convict laborers and state slaves, a practice that persisted through dynasties, where penal servitude was a sentence often worse than execution. In Korea, the Nobi system created a class of hereditary slaves that at one point comprised a third of the entire population, a system of indigenous slavery where Koreans enslaved other Koreans for over 1,000 years, a rigid hierarchy that treated human beings as movable property to be gifted, inherited, or sold to pay off debts. This was not slavery imposed by a foreign conqueror, but a domestic cancer that ate away at the society from within, proving that the drive to dominate is not a racial trait, but a human flaw. And what of the new world before the sails of the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria broke the horizon? We often view the pre-Columbian Americas as a lost Eden, but the Aztec Empire was a machine fueled by tribute and captivity, where slavery was often a prelude to a ritualized death. The Flower Wars were fought not for territory, but to capture living bodies for the sacrificial altars of Tenochtitlan, where the hearts of captives were offered to the sun to keep the universe in motion. In the Pacific Northwest of North America, indigenous tribes like the Haida and Tlingit were feared raiders who measured their wealth in the number of slaves they captured from rival groups, carving the faces of captives into their totem poles as a permanent testament to their dominance. This global tour of shackles reveals that slavery was not an invention of the colonial era, but the default setting of agrarian civilization, a brutal solution to the problem of labor and power that every society, from the Maya to the Mongols, stumbled upon and exploited. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that the desire to own another is written deep in our history, transcending geography, religion, and skin color. The tragedy of the Zand Rebellion in 9th century Iraq, where tens of thousands of East African slaves rose up against their Abbasid masters in a desperate bid for freedom that shook the caliphate to its core, echoes the same human cry for dignity that would later be heard in Haiti and Virginia. It is the same cry that rang out in the steppes of Russia when the serfs, tied to the land and sold along with the soil, groaned under the weight of the Tsars. We must also acknowledge the complexity of the transition, the gray areas where slavery hid behind other names, indentured servitude, debt bondage, serfdom, and forced labor systems that maintained the mechanics of slavery long after the word itself became taboo. In the 19th century, as the British Navy patrolled the Atlantic to suppress the trade they had once championed, the dhows of the Indian Ocean continued to sail by moonlight, and the caravans of the Sahara continued to walk the hidden paths, because the economic hunger for free labor did not vanish simply because a law was signed in London. The persistence of slavery in Mauritania, which only criminalized the practice in 2007, stands as a haunting reminder that this is not ancient history. It is a living shadow. By exploring these untold histories, we do not diminish the horror of the Atlantic trade. Rather, we contextualize it as the industrial apex of a practice that has plagued us since the dawn of time. The industrial scale of the Atlantic trade was unique, but the impulse was universal. To ignore the slave markets of Zanzibar, the slave raids of the Crimean Khanates, or the caste slavery of India is to deny the suffering of millions of ancestors whose stories have been erased by the passage of time and the bias of our focus. We owe it to the memory of the Slavic girl dragged to the Crimea, the Zanjal worker clearing the salt marshes of Basra, and the Korean Nobi serving his master's table, to remember that their chains were just as heavy, their tears just as bitter, and their longing for freedom just as fierce. This narrative is a tapestry woven from the darkest threads of the human experience, a reminder that civilization has often been built on the backs of those it chose to treat as invisible. It asks us to look at the Great Pyramids, the Colosseum, and the palaces of Istanbul, not just as monuments of architectural genius, but as grand tombstones for the unfree labor that raised them. It compels us to recognize that the fight for human dignity is the longest war we have ever fought, a war against our own worst nature, against the insidious idea that one person's life is merely fuel for another person's comfort. As we uncover these layers, we find that the history of slavery is the history of power, unchecked and unrefined, raw and brutal. It is the history of the janissary, who could be Grand Vizier but never free. The history of the concubine, whose son could be sultan but whose body was not her own. The history of the captive rower, whose rhythm kept the Mediterranean economy afloat. These are the ghosts of history, waiting in the wings of our collective consciousness, waiting for their stories to be told, not to compete with the narratives we know, but to complete the picture of who we are and where we have come from. It is a story of resilience as much as it is of oppression, for in every system of slavery there were rebellions, escapes, and subversions. The human spirit, no matter how heavily weighted, always seeks to surface. From the gladiator Spartacus shaking the foundations of Rome to the Zanj rebels holding off an empire for over a decade, the will to be free is the one constant that connects the Slavic thrall to the African captive. Understanding this global history inoculates us against the danger of viewing slavery as a crime of one specific group against another, revealing it instead as a universal failure of empathy that we have all, at various times and places, been guilty of perpetrating and suffering. It allows us to see the scars on the human soul, not as tribal markings, but as a shared injury that requires a shared healing. The story of slavery beyond the Atlantic is a descent into the inferno of the past, but it is a necessary journey if we are to understand the true costs of the world we have inherited. It challenges us to redefine our understanding of victimhood and villainy, to see the intricate economic webs that connected the furs of Russia to the coins of Baghdad, and the spices of the East to the gold of Venice, all greased by the sweat of the enslaved. It forces us to ask difficult questions about the nature of freedom. Is it a natural state or a hard-won anomaly in a history defined by hierarchy? As we move through the ruins of these ancient systems, we see that while the chains may have rusted away, the legacy of devaluation remains, echoing in the caste systems, the prejudices, and the inequalities that still fracture our world. To tell this story is to light a candle in the vast, dark cavern of the past, illuminating the faces of the forgotten, restoring their humanity, if only in our memory. It is a solemn duty to speak of the millions who lived and died without recording their own names, the silent majority of history whose labor made the chronicles of kings and conquerors possible. This is the untold history, the shadow narrative that runs beneath the surface of our textbooks, a dark river of humanity that flows from the dawn of agriculture to the threshold of the modern age, reminding us that the capacity for cruelty is boundless, but so too is the capacity for survival. The silence of the desert, the depth of the ocean, and the vastness of the steppes hold the secrets of these lost lives, and by listening to their silence, we can finally begin to hear the full, unedited story of us. It is a story that does not end with a treaty or a proclamation, but continues in the awareness we carry forward, a vigilance against the commodification of human life in any form. The history of slavery is not just black and white. It is a spectrum of suffering that touched every race, every religion, and every corner of the globe. It is a story of the darkness that lies in the human heart and the light that eventually, painfully, breaks through. It is the story of the world we built and the price we paid for it. It is a history that belongs to all of us, a burden and a lesson that we must carry together, ensuring that as we look back at the vast, sorrowful panorama of human bondage, we do so with eyes wide open, acknowledging every chain, every lash, and every stolen life, regardless of where the sun set on their suffering. This is the legacy beyond the Atlantic, the global heritage of resilience in the face of the ultimate theft, the theft of one's own self. It serves as a monumental warning from the past to the future, a testament that freedom is fragile and that the vigilance required to maintain it must be as universal as the threat against it has always been.